After the accident, she lost her voice and couldn't sing a lullaby to her crying daughter. But the way she found a way to sing, without words, will make you believe in miracles. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. It takes just a second for you but means the world to me. Twilight thickened over the house with its drawn curtains. Outside, the soft rustling of the wind swayed the branches of the old birch tree in the yard. In the dim glow of the hallway lamp, Michael slightly opened the front door and gently supported Sarah by the arm. She still felt weak after returning from the hospital. In her hands was a tiny bundle wrapped in a warm blanket, their newborn daughter, whom they had named Emily. The baby fidgeted restlessly, occasionally letting out small whimpering sounds that echoed through the empty rooms. Sarah lowered her eyes, cradled her daughter, and tried to whisper something. But instead of her familiar voice, she heard only a torn, almost soundless rasp. Her own muteness kept reminding her that they would all have to learn to live anew. Michael set a bag of medicine on the floor and gently placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Sarah," he began softly, struggling to find the right words. "Let me hold her, and you can sit down for a while." Sarah carefully passed the baby to her husband. Emily looked up at her father with large dark eyes and suddenly burst into loud cries. Michael felt his heart tighten with helplessness. He understood that at this moment, their baby needed her mother's closeness more than ever. The warmth of her voice, which had just tried to break free but had faded into a silent shadow. Holding his daughter close to his chest, he glanced at Sarah. She stood beside him, leaning against the wall, gently running her hand over her throat, as if the gesture alone could bring forth a sound. Tears clouded her eyes. The failed attempt to speak or even hum a lullaby burned her soul with unbearable sorrow. A deep sense of guilt was growing inside her. She was supposed to be the one to soothe her child with soft songs, to protect and provide comfort. "Why did this happen to me?" she asked herself, feeling a lump in her throat. "I promised I would be the best mother, that I would sing lullabies to her. And now I can't even say her name." Meanwhile, Michael gently rocked Emily, trying to calm her. But his efforts were clumsy. He had never realized before how crucial a mother's voice was to a newborn. In the month that had passed since the accident, both he and Sarah had grown used to the silence, to the absence of clear words in their home, but for their newborn it was an almost unbearable ordeal. "Shoo, shoo," Michael whispered, though he knew his voice could never replace the sweet melodies of a mother's lullaby. "We'll figure this out together, Sarah, I promise. We'll get through this." Hearing these words, Sarah nodded and wiped her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. Despair surged within her, but so did a flicker of hope. For the sake of her daughter, she was ready to overcome fear, pain, and even the voiceless void that now surrounded her on all sides. Only a few days had passed since Sarah and Michael first entered their home with Emily after the accident. But the usual peace and serenity that accompany the arrival of a newborn were almost entirely absent. The spacious living room felt cold and empty. There was no laughter, no joyful conversations, only the occasional whisper of the wind outside, reinforcing the silence. Trying to support his wife, Michael had taken on all household chores. He bought groceries, cooked meals, washed diapers, changed Emily's clothes, and took her for short walks when Sarah needed to rest. However, he could see that, emotionally, Sarah was struggling the most. Her silence, layered over the pain she had endured, felt like an impenetrable wall behind which hid fears, sorrows, and desperate attempts to adapt to her new reality. One evening, after settling Emily in her crib, Michael noticed Sarah sitting by the bedroom window, gazing absently outside. In her hands, she held an old journal filled with songs and short poems she had written before the accident, songs she used to love singing with her guitar. He stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, maybe you." His voice wavered for a moment, as he once again felt the abyss between them. "Maybe you want to talk? I know it's not easy." Sarah looked at him with gratitude but did not respond. For some reason, she didn't want to write her thoughts on paper. Instead, she lowered her gaze to the journal and carefully opened it to a page where her favorite lullaby had once been written. In the margins there were chord notations and colorful markings, small dreams of how she would one day sing to her daughter. God, how I wish everything could go back to the way it was. I had so many songs I wanted to sing to her. And now I don't even know what to do. She thought with sadness. Emily slept in her crib, but her sleep was restless. At any moment she could wake up and cry again, sensing the absence of her mother's voice. Sarah looked at her daughter through tear-filled eyes, then closed them for a moment, as if trying to reach deep inside herself for the voice she had lost. "Sweetheart," Michael whispered softly, careful not to wake the baby. "Let's think together about what we can do. Maybe there's therapy, special exercises to help restore your voice." Sarah, still watching Emily, shook her head. The doctors had already explained that the damage to her vocal cords was severe, and her chances of speaking as before were uncertain at best. She knew the road to recovery would be long, perhaps even futile, and she didn't want to waste her energy on empty hopes. Suddenly, the baby stirred and began to wake. A look of distress crossed Sarah's face. She dreaded every moment when Emily woke and started to cry because that was when she needed her mother's voice the most. The helpless wails echoed painfully in Sarah's heart, filling her with guilt for not being able to soothe her child. Then a small whimper broke the silence. Emily opened her eyes, her tiny face scrunching up as she reached out towards Sarah. Sarah quickly leaned over the crib, trying in any way she could to show her baby that she was there. But from her throat came only a faint whisper, a mere shadow of words that no longer existed. She turned to Michael, raising her eyebrows and touching her lips as if to ask him, "How do I help her without a voice? What should I do?" "It's okay," Michael reassured her, though he felt just as helpless. "We'll find another way." "We will." He gently picked Emily up and began rocking her while Sarah, leaning against the crib, watched the tears glisten on her child's cheeks and felt the creeping despair tighten its grip on her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing. For Emily's sake, she would search for any way, no matter how unconventional, to give her daughter a lullaby, even if it had no voice, as long as Emily could feel her mother's warmth. The next morning the house was quiet. Emily had only stopped crying at dawn, and now, exhausted from her tears, she slept peacefully in her crib. Michael, careful not to disturb the baby, had gone to the store for groceries, leaving Sarah alone with the tangled thoughts that refused to let her rest. "I can't go on like this," she thought, clutching her old journal to her chest. "I need to find a way to let her feel my love, even if words and voice are no longer there." Sarah approached the crib and sat on the floor beside it, gazing at Emily as she slept. The traces of previous tears were still visible on her tiny face, and her little hands clenched and unclenched in sleep, as if searching for something familiar and comforting. "What if I try writing her a lullaby?" Sarah pondered, turning the idea over in her mind. "Maybe I can put my songs on paper and find some way to share them with her?" She silently opened her journal, flipping through the pages. Among old notes and song sketches, a photograph slipped out, a picture of herself before the accident, smiling, holding a guitar, while Michael filmed her with the camera. Looking at that carefree reflection of the past, a sharp pang of pain surged through her. Memories flooded back. Singing in the kitchen, in the car, on the street without a care for noise or strangers' gazes. If only I could bring back even a piece of that, she thought bitterly, wiping away a tear from the corner of her eye. For Emily, I would do anything. Sarah reached for a pencil and tore out a blank sheet from the journal. Fragments of a lullaby swirled in her mind, one she had written during pregnancy when her heart was filled with quiet light and tender joy. Her fingers hesitantly moved across the paper. The words seemed to slip away the moment she tried to capture them, but she refused to give up. "Close your eyes, my little one," she wrote, pausing to recall how the next lines should go. She struggled to form the next verse, a familiar ache rising within her, like a wound that had yet to heal. Clenching the pencil tightly, she forced herself to write a few more lines. Though the words came with difficulty, she knew this lullaby was all she had left of her voice. As Sarah turned the page, she suddenly sensed a slight movement behind her. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw that Emily had opened her eyes and was now gazing at her with quiet curiosity. The baby was calm, as if seeing her mother so focused reassured her that everything was all right. Sarah froze, staring into her daughter's eyes, and an unexpected wave of strength washed over her. I need to show her that I'm here, she decided, nodding to herself. Even if I can't speak, I can still be present. Gently, Sarah closed the journal and reached out toward Emily. The baby wriggled her tiny fingers, and as if sensing her mother's warmth, she smiled in her sleep. At that sight, Sarah's heart clenched. It was the most precious reward for all the struggles and heartache. She knew that for the sake of that smile, she would keep writing, keep learning new ways to express love, so Emily would never feel lost in the silence. This is just the beginning, she thought, looking at her daughter. But I have hope now. At that moment, Sarah caught the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee. Michael had returned. Now together they would try to answer the question that had haunted her for days. How to give their child a lullaby without speaking a single word. Sarah slowly rose from the floor, feeling her weakened nerves tremble after everything she had endured. She wiped away invisible tears, trying to remain calm for Emily's sake, and stepped into the hallway, where Michael was already unpacking grocery bags and pouring coffee into mugs. Sarah, he called softly, noticing her near the doorway. I bought your favorite croissants and something else. Maybe you'll try some. She smiled faintly in gratitude and followed Michael into the kitchen. Her gaze was tired, but determination shone in her eyes. Michael placed a cup of coffee in front of her and carefully laid down a stack of printed papers. I asked at the pharmacy where we could get help, he said, lowering his eyes to the sheets. They suggested a rehabilitation center. And I also gathered information about sign language courses. Maybe that could be useful. Sarah took the papers in her hands and began flipping through them attentively. She wasn't sure if she could handle it all. The doctors had spoken of a long and difficult therapy, and taking care of Emily required all her strength. But something inside told her that moving toward a new form of communication was the only way forward. I just want her to feel that I'm here, she thought, running her fingers over the lines mentioning sessions with the sign language interpreter. And if gestures become my voice, then I have to learn. She looked up at Michael, nodded, and pointed to one of the pages that described an individual training program. Michael understood her agreement and exhaled with relief. Great, he said warmly. I'll call them today and try to arrange everything. I think this is a good step. And Michael hesitated for a moment as if considering whether to continue. I want to do something else. Maybe I could help you record your lullabies? We could create a small music corner in the living room. Even without words, you can still compose and I can play. Sarah gave him a grateful smile. Long ago, they used to make music together, and that shared creative experience had bonded them deeply. She reached out and wrote a short phrase on the edge of the list. Thank you for not giving up. I never will, Michael responded after reading her words. Because now we have Emily, and she deserves the best we can give her. At that moment, a soft whimper came from the bedroom. Sarah and Michael rose simultaneously and headed toward it, feeling a familiar tension. Each new cry from Emily reminded Sarah of her helplessness. But this time she decided to act differently. I won't just sit back, she resolved, thinking. Let Emily see that her mom is here and knows how to speak, even if it's with her hands. She approached the crib and leaned over Emily. The baby was already awake, shifting her tiny legs restlessly and whimpering softly. Sarah recalled a few basic signs she had once read about. Hesitantly, she raised her hands and tried to sign something close to Mom is here. And it's okay. The gestures weren't perfect, but her hands moved smoothly and warmly. Please understand me, she thought, looking at her daughter. I love you. To Sarah's surprise, Emily suddenly stopped whimpering and stared at her mother's hands, seemingly captivated by the gentle movements of her fingers. The baby appeared to hold her breath for a moment, trying to grasp the new images, and then her tiny lips curled into a faint smile. A deep sense of gratitude and inspiration swelled inside Sarah. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but she suddenly felt that she had found the first key to her daughter's heart. She responds to the gestures, Michael whispered, stepping closer. Look, she's interested. Sarah nodded reservedly, but inside she was rejoicing. Though her voice was lost forever, she could still give her daughter love. And if this was only the first step, then ahead of them lay many small victories that over time would merge into one great triumph, their own silent lullaby, full of warmth and tenderness. In the morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the loosely drawn curtains, Sarah was already sitting at the table with a pencil in hand. On the open page of her journal, half-finished lines of a lullaby took shape in her thoughts. Through the wall, she could hear Emily's soft cries. Michael was trying to soothe the baby after feeding her. "I have to finish this song," she thought, tapping the pencil nervously against the paper. "Even if only in silence, even if only on paper. For now, that will do." Sarah pressed the tip of the pencil to her lips and closed her eyes, trying to recall her life before the accident. Back then, she effortlessly composed lyrics and melodies, singing almost constantly. But now, everything felt distant and foreign. A bitter lump rose in her throat, momentarily blurring the letters before her. "Don't let this break you," she urged herself. "Emily needs you to be strong." Just then, Michael peeked into the kitchen, holding Emily in his arms. The baby had just stopped crying but still whimpered softly, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching. Seeing his wife, Michael smiled, and Sarah responded with a slight nod. "Sarah," he began, hesitating for a moment. "I called the rehabilitation center. They said we could start sign language lessons as early as today. I think it would be good for both of us, to make things easier for you and to help me communicate with you without barriers." Sarah raised her eyebrows, surprise and relief mixing in her expression. She made a few gestures trying to say, "Thank you for not giving up on me," but realized she didn't yet know how to express it properly. Instead, she simply set down her pencil, turned the paper toward herself and wrote briefly, "I am very grateful." "I know," Michael nodded, sitting beside her. "We'll get through this." And he hesitated, glancing down at their daughter before looking back at Sarah. "I also found out that the center has a special music therapist. They help people who have lost their hearing or voice adapt, teaching them to feel rhythm through vibrations and movement. Maybe that could help you." Sarah tilted her head in interest. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but curiosity stirred within her. The idea of experiencing music through rhythm and vibration seemed almost mystical, but what if this was the way she could sing without a voice? "I'll try," she resolved, watching Emily. "If it brings me closer to my daughter, I have to." She picked up her pencil again and wrote a short note. "Let's see the therapist together." Michael smiled, sensing that Sarah was open to new hope. For a moment, they both sat quietly at the table, listening to Emily's steady breathing as Michael still held her in his arms. "We can go for the first consultation today," he said softly, careful not to wake the baby. "But for now, do you want to hold her? I think she's starting to miss you." Sarah nodded gently. Michael carefully placed their daughter into her arms, and Sarah cradled Emily against her chest, her gaze sweeping over the baby's delicate eyelashes. Emily yawned and looked up at her mother with quiet curiosity. Sarah felt a tingling sensation in her eyes as she slowly moved her hands near Emily's face, dancing gentle gestures in the air. "Listen to my silent song," she thought, never taking her eyes off her daughter. "Let it be real, even if it doesn't sound in the air." Emily reached out with her tiny hand toward Sarah, who kissed her little fingers. In that moment, the young mother realized that sometimes the most important words don't need sound. They live in touch, in glances, in small movements that can tell an entire story. They arrived at the rehabilitation center in the afternoon, with the sleepy sun still casting light over the narrow streets. Inside, the building exuded an almost clinical cleanliness. Bright hallways, paintings of calming landscapes on the walls, and a faint scent of antiseptic. Sarah walked beside Michael, absently gripping a pen and notebook in her hands. A slight chill coursed through her skin, whether from nervousness or anticipation, she couldn't tell. "I hope this place gives us a chance," she thought, pressing her lips together. "I have to do everything for Emily." In the distance, a polite middle-aged woman in a blue uniform appeared. Upon seeing them, she smiled and made a welcoming gesture, a smooth motion of her hand that resembled a bow. A warmth spread through Sarah's chest. It was reassuring to realize that in this center, people truly knew how to communicate in sign language. Here it wasn't strange for someone to be unable to respond with their voice. "Hello," Michael said, inclining his head slightly. "We scheduled a consultation. My name is Michael Reeves and this is my wife Sarah. We'd like to learn about sign language programs and also about music therapy." Sarah noticed the woman shift her gaze to her, offering a soft smile as if inviting her to engage. Sarah hesitantly repeated the greeting gesture she had just seen, and the action sent an unfamiliar but pleasant feeling through her body, as if she had taken her first independent step into a vast unknown world. "Wonderful," the woman said warmly. "My name is Melissa. Please follow me to our assessment room. I'll bring in a sign language specialist, and then I'll introduce you to Ron, our music therapist." Melissa gestured for them to follow, and Sarah instinctively tried to mirror her movements. A spark of curiosity overtook her anxiety. Michael, carrying Emily, stepped ahead, while Sarah lingered for a brief moment, taking in the bright walls and neatly arranged brochures at the reception desk. "Who would have thought I'd have to learn to speak all over again, and in such an unusual way," she mused. "But if this helps me sing again, even without a voice, through hands and heart, it's worth it." Inside the room, a young woman with neatly tied chestnut hair awaited them. Introducing herself as Kayla, she explained that she was fluent in sign language and, as Melissa noted, had lost her hearing years ago but learned to hear vibrations and speak through her hands. It took Sarah a few minutes to adjust to the new setting. Kayla communicated both in signs and in a somewhat monotone voice, while Michael translated the most crucial details for Sarah. "We can start with the simplest signs," Kayla suggested as she sat across from Sarah. "Later we'll move on to basic grammar. But most importantly, I'd like to focus on interaction with your baby, gestures for soothing, affection, and expressing emotions." Hearing this, Sarah felt a surge of hope. She straightened in her seat and nodded, eager to learn. Kayla picked up a plush teddy bear from the table and slowly demonstrated gestures that could be used with the child. "Mommy's here. Sleep. I love you." Sarah carefully repeated them, determined to commit each motion to memory. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she knew this was her path to connecting with Emily, her only way forward. Michael observed with a gentle smile, noticing how Sarah pushed past her initial discomfort and fear. Her eyes lit up whenever she successfully mimicked a gesture. At one point, Emily whimpered, and without hesitation, Sarah turned to her daughter, signing quiet and "Mommy is here." The baby stilled, watching her mother's graceful hand movements with fascination. "She's responding," Sarah realized, her heartbeat quickening. "It's working." After a short break, a tall man with glasses entered the room. Something about his presence filled Sarah with a quiet confidence. He greeted them both with a spoken and signed introduction, ensuring accessibility for everyone. "I've heard about your situation," he addressed Sarah and Michael. "Losing one's voice is a tremendous challenge, but we can learn to experience music in new ways, especially when it comes to lullabies." Sarah froze. Michael, noticing the sudden gleam in her eyes, explained, "Sarah used to write her own songs, and now she wants to compose lullabies for Emily, not with her voice but through gestures and rhythm." "That's wonderful," Ron said with a smile. "We'll work on feeling rhythm and vibrations. I'll show you exercises on how to hear music through touch and movement. And if it works, you'll be able to transfer it to your daughter through touch, through motion. Babies are incredibly sensitive to tactile communication." Sarah took a deep breath. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through her mind. Is this really possible? Can I truly become the one who soothes Emily's cries again? "I believe you can," Ron said, as if reading her mind. "But it will take dedication. Are you ready?" She nodded firmly. Michael squeezed her hand in silent support. And in that moment, Sarah felt the vast chasm between her and the world she once knew begin to shrink. The final outcome was still uncertain, but fear was slowly giving way to inspiration. The first session with Ron took place in a small room lined with soft panels. In the corner stood an unusual device, resembling a wide horizontal board with speakers and thin vibration panels. At first, Sarah felt bewildered as she examined the setup, but after a few explanations, Ron suggested she simply lie down on the surface and relax. "Imagine hearing music through your skin," he said softly, turning on a quiet melody. "Feel the rhythm in your back, your legs, your hands. Try to sync with the vibrations as if each note is flowing through your body." Holding back her nervousness, Sarah lay on her back and closed her eyes. A gentle vibration from the speakers rippled through the mat, like waves of warm air. At first it felt strange, but soon she noticed her internal rhythm aligning with the pulsations, and her breathing gradually steadied. "I can feel it," she thought, listening to herself. "Maybe this is the music I am meant to sing to Emily?" As the melody shifted to a more measured tempo, Sarah noticed her hands beginning to move instinctively, her fingers twitching slightly, as if trying to replicate a familiar rhythmic pattern. She recalled the lullaby she had recently written down. Even though she no longer had a voice, the melody still lived inside her, and now she seemed to be expressing it through the air. "Excellent," Ron commented with a gentle smile as Sarah sat up. "You pick up on vibrations quickly. If you compose music this way, you can record it in movement. Try forming a series of fluid gestures to the rhythm, then repeat them when you hold Emily." Michael, watching from the side, felt a growing sense of excitement. He could see Sarah slowly overcoming her fears and opening up to something new. He liked this idea, not just to soothe their baby, but to help his wife rediscover her love for music. Singing had once been her passion, an integral part of her identity, and losing her voice had felt like losing her soul. "We should install something similar at home," Michael murmured to Ron. "A small panel or maybe headphones with strong bass so Sarah can practice." "Great idea," Ron replied, patting Michael's shoulder. "The more practice, the easier it will be for her body to remember the vibrations." Sarah exchanged a knowing glance with Michael. Her eyes reflected gratitude. Without his support, she wouldn't have embraced this journey so quickly. "I will do everything to bring music back into our lives," she thought, squeezing Michael's hand lightly. "And I will do everything so Emily knows my lullaby." After a short break, they moved to another room where Ron encouraged Sarah to hold Emily while trying to transfer the music to her. Sarah hesitated, worried the experience might be unsettling for the baby. But seeing Ron's reassuring smile, she carefully cradled her daughter and began swaying gently in time with the soft beat of an ethnic drum playing through the speakers. "Feel the rhythm," Ron reminded her, pointing to her feet. "Let it travel upward, through your legs, your torso, your arms. And smile, you're giving her music." Sarah followed his guidance. With each passing moment, her movements grew more fluid. Emily gazed at her mother, her wide eyes absorbing the unfamiliar harmony. There were no words, no singing, just movement and rhythm. Feeling the steady sway, Emily relaxed, her tiny fingers unclenching. "She's not crying," Sarah observed, looking down at her daughter. "Maybe she actually likes this?" A sense of relief and joy blossomed inside her. When the music faded, Emily remained calm, and Sarah gently handed her to Michael. The baby, soothed by the new experience, nestled against his shoulder and soon drifted into sleep. "You did great," Ron concluded. "Now let's reinforce this at home. Over time you'll be able to combine vibrations, gestures, and, let's call it silent singing. Your inner voice is still there, believe me." Sarah smiled, gratitude shining in her expression. Gone were the painful doubts. What if nothing worked? What if Emily never felt her mother's warmth? Now she was determined to move forward. She might never regain her voice in the traditional sense, but she would find another way to share her melody. A deep, quiet one, born within her, meant only for those she loved. "I'm halfway to our new lullaby," she thought, stroking Emily's head. "And I will do everything to make sure it fills this home." Several weeks passed like a hazy whirlwind. Sarah had to travel to the rehabilitation center daily for sign language and music therapy sessions. Michael took care of Emily and did everything he could to support his wife, seeing her determined effort to bring familiar music back into their home, even without words. One evening, After the day's bustle had settled and Emily was drifting into sleep, Sarah quietly slipped into her room. On the desk lay pages filled with handwritten lyrics, the lullaby she had been composing for as long as she could remember. Under the gentle whisper of the night wind, she began piecing together the scattered lines into a complete song. "Let this be my final attempt to give shape to what I hold in my heart," she thought, biting her lip to keep from crying. "Even if no one ever hears these words." In the next room, Michael listened to Emily's soft breathing as she slept and glanced at the strange apparatus he had recently brought home from the rehabilitation center. He knew Sarah would return soon, and he had prepared a surprise for her. Quietly on tiptoe, he pulled a small player from the drawer, preloaded with recordings, short melodic fragments resembling rhythmic improvisations designed for the vibration panel. But one track was special, an instrumental version of Sarah's lullaby, arranged using her notes. Michael had done his best to play along on the guitar, using the old chords and lyrics she had written. "I can't sing it with her voice," he thought, adjusting the volume on the mini speaker, "but maybe this will make it a little easier for her." When Sarah entered the room, she was already clutching the pages to her chest, ready to place them in a folder. Seeing the uncertain look on Michael's face and the unfamiliar device, she raised an eyebrow in question. Michael quietly pointed to the chair and gestured. "Sit. Listen. He started, but the words wouldn't come out. "I wanted to give you your lullaby. Not with my voice, I'm sorry, but with a melody that's here," he tapped his chest. "And here," he pointed to the player. "I recorded it using your notes. Just feel the rhythm and imagine it inside you." Sarah sat down, carefully placed the papers before her, and felt a sharp twinge of anticipation in her chest. Michael pressed play and a warm, gentle melody filled the room. The sounds reminded her of the days when she was full of energy, singing to her unborn Emily every night, dreaming of the day her daughter would fall asleep to her voice. "My words," she thought, struggling to keep her composure. He brought them to life in music. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. The melody she had once composed now surrounded her, and even without words, it was filled with tenderness and love. A soft rustling came from the doorway, and then Emily appeared, swaying slightly as she walked toward her parents on her still unstable legs. Sarah immediately stood and scooped up her daughter. Emily gazed at her mother, sensing the vibration of the melody, and then suddenly she smiled. That warm, almost knowing smile lit up the entire room. Sarah pressed her daughter close, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. "She hears my song," Michael whispered, unable to hold back his own tears. "Even though your voice is silent, your heart is singing, Sarah, and she feels it." Sarah nodded gently, letting tears fall onto Emily's soft hair. The baby, feeling her mother's emotions, curled her lips slightly but did not cry. She simply looked peaceful, almost happy. Then Sarah made a few familiar gestures, one she had learned in therapy. "Mommy is here and everything is okay," before resting her cheek against her daughter's head. "She really does hear me," Sarah realized. And a voice, it can take many forms. It can be expressed through hands, through the heart, through touch. This is my voiceless lullaby. The melody came to an end, leaving behind a quiet echo of rhythm. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off Emily, who was now smiling in her sleep, nor off Michael, who wiped away a tear. In that silent moment, something truly magical took shape. An understanding that all their losses and fears had transformed into a new kind of love and motherhood. "Thank you," Sarah wrote on a piece of paper once she could breathe again. "You gave me back my song." Michael simply stepped forward and embraced them both. His face showed exhaustion but also relief. In this home, which had once been drowned in agonizing silence, a lullaby had been reborn, not in sound, but in something even more profound and real. True love and a mother's care don't depend on words. They can be expressed through touch, gestures, and even silence. Sometimes the deepest feelings speak the loudest when we learn to communicate with our hearts. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.